This is episode 103 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing. I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. This and every week, we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. This week, I am pleased to be joined by a Rio Grande Foundation board member and local businessman, specifically a real estate broker, Evan Jones. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Evan.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and sit here and talk about myself for a while. We'll talk about more than just yourself, but I do like to get into a little bit of what people are all about. And you're a relatively new addition to the board. You're also younger than the president of the organization. I'm 44 now. I have celebrated my birthday in May, and you're a younger guy. I think that qualifies you almost as a millennial, but depending on who you ask, some people say 78, some people say 82. I was born in 79, so
there you go. But you're a native Albuquerquean, or as Mayor Keller seems to call it, Burqueño.
Yes.
So before we get into your professional background, tell us about your ideological background. And were you born out of the womb a card-carrying, conservative, libertarian, free market person, or was this something that's relatively new to you?
I would say that I was born to conservatives, but not born a conservative. My parents were sort of the children of the 60s and 70s, so they were pretty liberal. And as they got older, as a lot of us do, they became more conservative. And so I was brought up in a conservative home, conservative values. We were church-going people. My dad was both of my parents were business owners, but as the business grew and as me and my brother grew, my mom started staying home with us, and my dad was, sort of you could call a company man, but for his own company, worked lots of hours, picked a career, and just stuck with it. He still is in the jewelry business today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So making jewelry or?
Yes, manufacturing. They started it in their kitchen at a house down on Glorieta, and expanded to a shop over on San Mateo and Acoma. And, I think that they had some pretty great growth. In the first year, they did 18,000 in 1974. The second year, 1975, they did about 150,000 in business. Just grew exponentially until about the mid 90s. We had to change locations a couple times to support the growth of the company, and had lots of customers all over the country. Really great little company.
So obviously you did not jump into the jewelry business. That was not the calling that you chose in your own life, or did you?
It was kind of another thing. In the same way, I was born to business owners, so naturally they wanted to get me involved in the business. So, Saturday afternoons, me and my brother and our friend Corey, whose father also worked there, would go sweep the floor, sort jewelry. Wasn't anything that really was critical to the company, but they wanted to give us something to do and pay us a couple bucks. So I learned from an early age about work ethic, hard work and reaping the rewards of hard work. Grew up in the company, went from, like I said, sweeping the floors all the way up to sort of not necessarily the executive level, but at a level with some authority, mostly doing marketing and artwork and sort of production engineering, if you will, making tools to make the production go smoother, helping develop systems for making a smooth transition from start to finish, that sort of thing, getting orders out the door, that kind of thing.
Now, was that, being around a small business, a family-owned business, was that something that you think contributed to your eventual beliefs in kind of economic freedom and getting things done yourself, not waiting around for government to do them, which unfortunately is too common in New Mexico?
Agreed.
So
yes, because they say you learn how to be a man from your father, and the way that I learned to be a man was to be to not have a boss, but to be my own boss. I saw him continually pushing the envelope and doing things his own way, and pushing for smaller government, limited amount of government involvement in his life and his business. And so, that's what I saw growing up. But of course, as many people do, I turned away from that in my early 20s because I wanted to sort of do anything else besides and believe anything else besides what my parents believed, and became pretty liberal for quite a while, and then started to really see the lie that kind of was, at least to me, and got a chance to do quite a bit of traveling and saw what unlimited government did and has done in other parts of the world, and started to see the value of my parents' way of thinking, being able to do things the way that they wanted, and to, business owners are kind of a special sort of, it's almost like in the DNA, I think. And I think that that's in my DNA, though I tried to deny it for quite a long time. I did lots of different kinds of things working for other people. My dad told me one time, he said, "Son, I just don't think you're going to be happy anytime you're working for anybody else. I think you need to be your own boss." So the sooner, by the time I realized that, I was in my mid-20s, late 20s, and have found that being my own boss, to the extent of controlling my own hours, controlling my business, I have been a happier person, for sure.
That's great. It's a kind of that old quote about, when you were young, you thought your parents were idiots, and then
absolutely
you got older and you realized, gosh, they're so smart.
Yeah, my dad told me one time when I was 18 or so, he said, "Son, you're gonna be amazed at how smart your mom and I get between now and the time you're about 30.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you do work for yourself in a way,
sure,
as being a real estate broker. So, anything you want to share about that industry, but of course, want to talk about Albuquerque and the market here as well. Anything that we should know about what's happening, or what unique features, I guess, of New Mexico's real estate market as you see them?
Well, I don't know how unique they are, but right now I don't know if you pay attention to the real estate market or anything, but right now we're in what's called a seller's market, meaning that there is a low amount of inventory, very few houses on the market, and there's a whole bunch of buyers out there to buy them. So, we have about a 2-month supply of homes right now, about 2,800, which means that at the rate currently that houses are currently being purchased, if all of us realtors in Albuquerque stop listing homes today, we would run out of houses in 2 months. And a balanced market is 6 months worth of inventory. So we're really low. Last year at this time, we had about 4,000 homes on the market, and it's just steadily gone. It went up a little bit after May last year, and then it's just gone. It's taken a big dip. So people are clamoring. It's very competitive right now. When I work with people, I say, "Hey, do you have a competitive streak?" Because if you have a competitive streak, now is the time to sort of tap into that, because a house that's in good condition in a decent area that's well priced, especially in the price range of about $259, $270, something like that, there's a whole bunch of people out there that can afford that and that want that. So I tell people, think of this as like a tournament, because you're probably going to get in there and you're going to make an offer on a couple of houses, and just by law of averages, you're probably not going to get the first one. You're going to have to try a few times. And the people who are willing to, get all their ducks in a row, financially speaking, get lined up with a really good lender, who can close a loan quickly and efficiently, is highly recommendable right now, because the lender and the broker that you're working with can make a big difference in how the seller feels about the offer, because they're going to have, I've seen situations in the last week where it's been a house goes on the market, and by noon that day, they have 6 or 7 offers, good, solid offers with people that are serious, that have their financing done, that have purchased houses before, that have money for the transaction itself, inspections, appraisal, all earnest money, all that stuff. And the seller just kind of is able to choose, not necessarily on price and terms, but based on the quality of the broker and the quality of the lender that they're working with. And that's new for me. I'm a pretty competitive person. So I'm thriving in the market the way it is right now. I work with more buyers than I do sellers at this point, and I like the having to hustle.
So a couple quick things. So first and foremost, how long have you been doing real estate?
I've been in the business since 2017.
Okay, so you're relatively new to it, but you've seen some dramatic trends here in just the past few years. And I want to talk about those in a second. But why don't you give out your contact information right now? People, they're looking to buy, they're looking to sell. We're free market capitalists here at the Rio Grande Foundation. So how do they get in touch with you?
Again, my name is Evan Jones. You can reach me at 505-600-5510. Or you can email me at jonesnextdoor@kw.com. KW is for Keller Williams, and I'm an independent broker there.
So I love the crossover between, the economic theory and the economic practice. And, I guess in real terms, Rio Grande Foundation, we're more in the economic theory portion of the spectrum, and you're much more involved in the practice of the actual industry, at least a very integral industry here in New Mexico. Now, since 2017, we've seen some pretty significant shifts in New Mexico's economy. Has that been reflected in the housing market over that time frame? I'm assuming that back when you started, it may not have been a seller's market quite at that time.
It was turning into one when I got in the business, and that shift sort of happened, and that's been the kind of market I've been in during my entire career, if you want to call it that. And interest rates have a big effect on that. The economy has a big effect on interest rates. Right now we're at, for a 30-year fixed mortgage for somebody that's well qualified with good loan to value ratio for the house that they want to buy, they can get 4%. Mm-hmm. And, that's a 16-month low. The interest rates were there, and they're, even when they were, what people were calling high recently, they were still historically very low.
Sure.
Back in the 1990s, you were seeing, 10% and higher.
Yep.
Now, 4 1/8, 4%, the worse your credit is, the higher rate's going to be. But, like I said, for a well-qualified person, they can get right around 4% right now.
Now, looking at New Mexico's economy again, it was pretty rough sledding all the way going back to the Great Recession of 2008. It took really close to a decade. So your timing was impeccable.
It was pretty good.
in terms of getting involved in real estate here in Albuquerque and New Mexico.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Now, that all being said, and I don't know if you talk to people in other states and whatnot, Colorado, Arizona, they threw at me some numbers because I was just in Arizona about how fast everything is growing out there. And as good as it seems right now in New Mexico,
right,
our neighbors are all blowing the doors off of us.
Yes, they are.
Now, they're also building up a housing stock that we haven't seen. So I guess talk about where you see either New Mexico or Albuquerque, what are the obstacles to continuing expanding upon this current growth trajectory that we finally got here in our state? Is there anything, is it supply of houses? Do people just need to build more houses? What's
our inventory is low. The amount of houses that are out there is just not enough for the demand. That's for sure. One of the other issues that we're having right now, economically speaking, is that, people are moving here. Mostly, most of the people that I work with that are relocating are relocating from California because, the way that the government is there and the way that the housing market is there, I worked with some people last summer. They said, we have a house in Carmel that we just sold. 1,300.
Carmel is beautiful, by the way.
Yes,
I know that is a absolutely amazing area, very expensive, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Like these people had a 1,300 square foot home that they had just sold for $795,000 in Carmel. And then they came here and we started looking around and they're looking at 2,500 square foot houses for $450,000, 650 around there, and they're just like, this is like a candy store, you know. Of course, you know, they weren't completely sold on Albuquerque as a city, but they loved the prices and the quality that they could get for their money. Now,
let me jump in. Are these sound like kind of developed professionally folks? Are they retirees, or are they kind of moving towards the end of their career stage?
They were relocating for work.
Really?
Yeah, they were. Most of the people that we work with are retirees that want a less expensive place to live, where they can get a nice little patio home in the valley, 2,000 square foot and fewer. That's what we're seeing most of. Okay. And that's what I am seeing most of.
Well,
with relocations.
You know, and I know this is stuff that I look at too from the opposite side, and it's not a surprise that it's retirees. In fact, we on the podcast a few weeks ago talked about United Van Lines did a study.
I read that,
where the majority or the largest proportion of people moving here of any state were moving to retire. Mm-hmm. Now, so you're definitely seeing that. And what do you think for your industry? What does that mean? Because we've talked about the public policy aspects, but what does that mean for the housing market? It sounds like smaller houses, so they're downsizing. Any other aspects?
Well, that, you know, what that does is that makes it a seller's market only up to a certain price point. You know, we've got a seller's market up to, you know, about $500,000 or less. And then above that, it's more of a buyer's market, because, you know, there's a bunch of people that want to downsize, and there's only a few people who want to buy a bigger house. So it kind of turns the seller's market upside down. So you have to be, when people ask what the real estate market is like here, you can't just say, well, it's really busy. Yeah. I'm really busy. You have to ask follow-up questions like, what portion of the market are you interested in? Are you interested in this price point or higher? Are you down in the lower part of the market? The part of town makes a big difference.
So the valley is where you're seeing the most activity.
That's where I see the most activity for retirees, because there's a couple of builders here in town that focus on infill. They'll go and they'll find an acre and a half, 2 acres of land that's owned by some family whose relative has died. They'll raise it and they'll build 8 patio homes on it, 2,000 square feet, $450,000. And sometimes they sell before they're even built.
Right. And by patio homes, that just means that they're built on kind of a slab.
Well, generally with patio homes, what we see, and this isn't always, sometimes they're detached, you know, not attached. sometimes they're detached. Most of the time they're attached. So they'll be, you know, they'll sort of share a driveway.
So a duplex.
They'll have a small back.
What I would call a duplex.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm using these terms probably from the 70s.
It is what a lot of people in the audience might think of as a duplex, but most of the time they're not actually attached. They're just very, very close and attached at the front and the back on a different slab. Everything else is disconnected. And, you know, they can squeeze them in, but the nice thing is, the okay thing for the builder is that the kind of buyer that they're looking for doesn't want a big yard to deal with. They want a tight-knit little neighborhood in a safe area.
Well, in Albuquerque, you know, I learned this very quickly coming from the East Coast. You know, I grew up cutting yards and all that kind of stuff. You growing up here, probably not as big of a market for cutting yards, because
not as many yards. That's
not as many yards. And, you know, if you have a really big yard, you might wind up with a really big patch of dirt, which nobody likes to have. And we put in artificial turf. Right. Partially we had dogs, but covering a large area with artificial turf gets very expensive very quickly. Mm-hmm. One question I have for you is, do you see most of these retirees going for single story houses? Is the story factor an issue? Because at least in our neighborhood, if you put a 1-story house on the market, you tend to see it sell very quickly.
That's absolutely
whereas 2 stories not as fast.
Yeah, 2-story houses generally sell for fewer dollars per square foot, and they take a little bit longer to sell. So, you know, especially with the retirees, sometimes they'll be open to a 2-story house at the beginning, but they end up going with a 1-story, or they'll be willing to go with a 2-story house if it has everything that they need on the bottom floor. You know, the master suite's on the bottom floor. Obviously, the kitchen be on the bottom floor. And then the upstairs is just sort of guest area for when friends from out of town come or family comes to visit, that sort of thing. Yes, overwhelmingly one story is more popular with that demographic.
So, of course, crime is a critical issue, and you're seeing selection already kick in because retirees, they don't need a job, they don't need a job every day. They might work remotely for a while, but then they're able to move beyond that. But for families, and both of us have families, you're not seeing that level of folks moving in, and crime, is that something that you get a lot of questions on?
Absolutely.
And also, to the extent you do have families, schools.
Absolutely. Those are two major factors.
So what do older retirees say when they know the crime statistics, but I'm
Right.
sure they've got to bring it up to you. So what do you tell them, or what do they say to you when they actually are still willing to sign on the bottom line despite all that crime?
Sure. Well, when people ask me what's the crime rate like in this neighborhood, my answer has to be, here's the APD crime map. That's not an area of expertise for me. I can be the source of that information, but I can't be the direct source of, this is pretty good. It's not too bad. I heard a guy's car got broken into over there. Most of it, even though there is a lot of violent crime in this city, we do see a lot of, mostly property crime. Now, when it comes to the areas where these retirees want to move, generally speaking, we'll have one conversation about it, but then there's so many other things that they're thinking about when purchasing a home. Crime ends up, if it's not really, really bad and there wasn't somebody murdered next door, they're generally speaking, that sort of starts to become a lower priority because they realize that they don't have that many options right now. They're going to have to make, I always tell people I've never seen a perfect house in a perfect location. There's some that are better, but you have to decide. I tell people to decide what are your top 5 things that you must have in a new home, and stick with those and be flexible with everything else. And with the retirees, the school districts, it just depends. They'll say most of the time they're buying a house that they plan on being the last house that they buy. Mm-hmm. And, we're going to die here, and then it'll be our kids' problem to sell it if it's in a bad school district. It's just that's not as much of a priority. Obviously that's more of a priority for people who are younger, who have younger families where they're going to have to send their kids there. And then also to the schools in that district, and then also, resale. The school district that a house is, there's when you're on the borders of a school district that's desirable and one that's not so desirable, you can see huge differences in time on market and value, even though they're just right across the street from each other. And that's kind of an interesting, there's a place where Sandia High School's district, it's right next to Del Norte's school district. And the houses it's just night and day how fast they sell and the value for which they sell.
Well, I live in the area right on the border between Volcano Vista and West Mesa.
Right.
And,
so it's a similar sort of dichotomy there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, there's so much to talk about, but I want to get back to the Californians, and you say that they're a big group that's moving out here.
That I'm seeing.
That you're saying. Well,
so
I think statistically there is a big outflow from California. It's a heavily populated state.
Right.
And it only makes sense. Folks who have some limit to their spending, their amount of money,
sure,
are likely to want to leave California due to the incredibly onerous taxation and whatnot.
Draconian.
And they can get more from New Mexico. What do you hear when you talk to the Californians that you work with? Especially, I have to throw this out there because so many people around the West, and I go to these conferences and you hear the folks in Colorado and Arizona, Nevada, other states saying, holy cow, we are getting crushed politically in our state because these Californians are moving out of California and then bringing their California ideas to where they are.
Yeah, they're running away from something that they don't like in California, and they're trying to bring it.
Now, you're probably not involved in political discussions with these people, but kind of give me the zeitgeist of what...
Not unless I know we can get along at some level, because that can just be very...
But what do you hear from those folks in terms of why they're getting out of California? Is it purely a dollars and cents thing, or traffic, or what do we...
Generally speaking, what I hear is that everything's just too expensive. Real estate's too expensive and taxes are too high, and it's an economic decision. They can come here with enough money to buy a house cash and have a couple $100,000 left over if they've got a good amount of equity in their home. And so it seems to be an economic issue tied to the political climate. Those things are inextricably connected. So, it's an economic issue for the most part that I hear, but we don't get into the political stuff unless I see somebody, unless I hear somebody say something specific to try to take my temperature or whatever, or I might drop a hint to take their temperature. If we don't, connect on that, I just don't bring anything up. We just talk houses.
Not a lot of Californians fleeing to come to New Mexico with Trump stickers on the back of their vehicles, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So, any other states that you see people moving here? I guess, you just get the exchange, the Texas, the Arizona,
right.
But
yes,
no one else is just kind of palpable that you see.
Well, it's, statistically speaking, it's Florida, Indiana, Maryland, Tennessee, and Ohio. Statistically speaking, those are the ones that come to New Mexico the most for some reason. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but the problem is that, we've, at the same time people are coming in, we've got New Mexicans coming out, and generally speaking, the people who are coming in are at sort of a lower economic level, a lower educational level than the people who are leaving, causing what they call, brain drain. I think I've heard you use that term before.
Right. Well, with retirees, you'd expect that they would be fairly financially viable. Are you talking about that group, or more of the family type group?
Well, I guess it's kind of both.
Yeah.
Most of the retirees that I see are coming from California and Arizona. And then, that's, I haven't worked with anybody from any of those states that I just named, those 5 states that I just named, but statistically speaking, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's just, I guess it's just, I can't speak for who other people in my brokerage are working with. I can only speak from my own and my wife's experience. She's also a broker at KW. And that's what we're seeing. Most of the time they have all their ducks in a row. They're ready to go. And they say, we want to live in New Mexico. We love the weather here. We love the Southwest. We love the desert, the dry climate, that sort of thing. And for better or for worse, politics usually doesn't come up.
So any idea why the housing supply is not being built? Because we used to have a home builder on our board. We talk about the opportunities for people to build. There's that TIDD, the tax increment development district, that is supposed to be a big, center for development, kind of southwest quadrant of the city. What is happening or not happening in the actual building market? You talked about people in the valley, kind of onesies and twosies and small little developments, but
sure.
I haven't seen a major housing development in this metro area since the housing crisis,
right.
Back in 2008.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just a matter of space, close enough to the resources and stuff in the city. I can't speak directly to why that's not happening more. Maybe it's nobody's got enough money to build a big development at this point, or maybe there's not. I'm not really sure what the issue is there. I know that houses are being built. It's a boutique type of a thing that's happening in Albuquerque right now for whatever reason.
If you're from California and you've sold a $770,000 house, you can clearly afford the boutique aspects of it. How about Rio Rancho? You look at Rio Rancho and it's maybe not as geographically desirable,
sure.
but the schools are better, the taxes are lower.
Yep.
There's more open land. They've got all that goofy stuff going on with the platting issues,
right.
But we've seen some major developments in Rio Rancho prior to the downturn. Do you see Rio Rancho, people, maybe locals moving out to Rio Rancho?
Definitely.
Okay.
People will move from, they will have been in the Northeast Heights, and that's where they grew up and everything. So that's where they decided to buy a house. But then they see how much more house they can get for their money in Rio Rancho, and they look at the property taxes and stuff, and they make for Rio Rancho. And it's kind of a feeding frenzy out there right now, because people get a hold of a house out there and they don't want to leave it, because they know that they're not going to have a whole lot of they're not going to have a whole lot of options in any other part of Rio Rancho, and definitely not in Albuquerque either. But yeah, I'm shopping with a couple right now that I've worked with before, and they're wondering why I'm not sending them. Why aren't you sending us any listings? And I tell them, hey, I send them to you every time they come up, but people are just not selling. They want to be in Cabazon. I'm sure you're familiar with that area. Mm-hmm. They want to be in that area. They want to find a house that's, $225,000 to about $260,000. And that's slim pickings out there right now. And you just got to be ready to, even be willing to make an offer before you get a chance to see it, is how the market is right now. Because somebody else with a qualified buyer is going to know that this particular house is coming on the market, and they will make an appointment the very first second the house is available and throw in an offer. And, I would have a hard time buying a house that I'd never seen before, but in this kind of market, people have to be willing to do that if they want to get their hands on one.
Now, do you see this, and I know you're not an economics prognosticator, but surely you read reports, you talk to other people.
Sure.
Do you see this as kind of a continuing phase in the local real estate economy, or do you see a slowdown coming? Do you, where are you looking at things for the next 6 months?
Well, I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more listing activity in Albuquerque over the summertime.
And summer is traditionally
it's a busy time.
That's the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're going to start seeing an increase in inventory for sure. There's a lot of people saying that we're going to have a downturn. Their estimates on when that's actually going to happen vary. I'm not in a point right now where I've been in the business long enough where I'm either jaded or I can see that far into the future, or like you were saying, prognosticate. So I'm just kind of dealing with what's in front of me right now. And I feel pretty strongly, based on the data that I've seen and the people that I've talked to, and maybe I just want to believe this, but I see more listing activity happening over the next 4 months or so. That's going to be sort of a relief. But the thing about it is that the absorption rate is so high that there's going to have to be a lot more houses listed over the next 4 months in order for it to make a really big dent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to throw a few things at you, and I'll let you respond. So, Rio Grande Foundation obviously looks at this stuff pretty closely. We see oil production booming,
right.
Tripling since 2012, likely to double between now and 2021. That may be most apparent in Southeast New Mexico,
Absolutely.
but that money sprinkles itself throughout the state and
right.
props up our economy here. Of course, we've got urbanization generally as a trend across our country. We talked pretty extensively about the retirees. They're coming. Do you see younger families moving out, or do you just see kind of less of them moving in? Because we statistically see more young people moving out, but do you see that like in your day-to-day job?
Who I'm working with a lot right now are actually millennials who are buying their first home. And most of the time they're people who have graduated from college, who've been in the professional world for a couple of years, and they want a nice little starter home. What a starter home is different based on people's education level, economic abilities, and
how about downtown? Do you see people like those people trying to move downtown? I mean, there's so many issues downtown, but you do see an increased emphasis on housing down there.
Sure. Some people just want to live downtown because they want to live downtown.
Right.
They don't really have any, I've just always wanted to live down here. And, my parents never wanted to live down here. So now that I'm on my own, that's where I want to live. And they want, a lot of it is they just want access to the bars and the clubs and whatever they're not in huge supply or whatever, but to somebody that's never had access to it, they see it as kind of a great opportunity. I lived in the downtown area for a couple of years in my early to mid 20s. I had a heck of a lot of fun, but I would never buy a house down there. There's too many other factors besides, the age of the house is generally a lot higher. You've got, lots of homeless people hang out down there, and that, because of the
Well, there's not many houses downtown. I mean, it depends on what you define as downtown.
Sure,
what do you
yeah,
define as downtown?
Well, I'm thinking of downtown as being anywhere, you know, between, you know, I think of downtown starting at the railroad tracks at Central and then going all the way west past, you know, 15th Street, something like that. So sort of bordering with. And
there's some beautiful houses in there when you get into the country club area.
Huning Castle and the country club are great. I kind of omit them when I'm thinking about the downtown area because they're kind of their own little pocket, sort of insulated.
Right. So is where, you know, you are an elder millennial. Do you see millennials as interacting with them in the housing context? Is that different from?
Yes. From Gen Xers?
Well, whatever. Gen Xers
boomers.
Or older retirees. You know,
well,
what do the millennials bring in? What issues or concepts do they have that are notable for their differences between the other generations?
Well, you know, with the other generations, with the baby boomers, they're kind of like, well, you know, it's amazing. It's interesting what you can get for $450,000 now compared to, you know, back in my day, that sort of talk. And so they'll be a little bit more, you know, they're sort of more independent and they want to be in charge when it comes to the houses that they see and things that are done and the way that their offers are written and that sort of thing and who they use as a lender or whatever. And I would say that the older Gen Xers are more independent also. They you know, if I meet a Gen Xer at an open house and I talk to them about, you know, who they're working with, is who their broker is or whatever, they're more likely to say, we're not working with a broker, but we're not going to use a broker. And then, you know, I have to go through the whole thing where I explain, you know, in New Mexico, the seller pays my commission. So it's a very unlikely scenario that if you work with me as your buyer's broker, that you would ever have to pay me or write me any kind of a check. You get the benefit of my services, but you don't have to pay for them directly. And, you know, there's just an independent streak with Gen Xers for sure. And that's something that I got, even though I'm sort of on the cusp, that's something I got from Generation X. There's a lot
Nobody wants to be in that millennial group. My wife is the same way.
And I'm talking about strict numbers here about what's what.
She is an elder millennial as well, like yourself, and she keeps claiming this exennial, something about technology.
Exennial, that's funny.
Technology. So let's talk about millennials and
sure.
their views on housing. What makes them unique?
So
in general, you
know, you put a smile on my face when you talk about millennials regarding real estate, and it's a different story if you're talking about politics. But, you know, when I find with real estate that they walk, say, similar scenario at an open house, a millennial walks in the door, I ask them who they're working with, and they say, oh, we haven't really met anybody yet that we thought we'd want to work with. What do you have to offer? And it's this totally different conversation where, you know, I tell them about what's happening in the market and what to expect, the services that I provide and everything, and they're like, great. And you're offering this to me and the seller is going to pay you at the end. Let's do this. And they listen. You know, I'll tell them, hey, this is the kind of offer. I can't tell people. I'm not an agent of my people. I'm a transaction broker. I can't act on their behalf. I can act at their instruction. So that has to be something that we have to clear up right at the beginning. But they, you know, I'll say, I recommend that you make this kind of offer. You offer to pay for your own inspections. You offer to pay for your own appraisal. You go, you know, you might need to go a little bit above list and you might try to close in 30 days. And they're like, okay, let's do that. And I find them to be very well prepared, and they will you know, a lot of the time they will already have explored a couple of different lending options, and they are open. They're much more open to my advice than the Gen Xers are. You know, they'll say, we want to buy a house, but we haven't talked to a lender and we don't know how much we can afford. So can we go look at these 4 houses? And it's like, I don't think I can really do that because, you know, I don't want you to fall in love with a $400,000 house when you can only afford $300,000, between which there's often a drastic difference. So millennials are great. I love working with them in real estate.
All right. Well, that is perhaps the first positive thing that's been said about millennials on this podcast.
But I don't claim to be one.
We'll chalk it up. He still does not claim to be a millennial.
Well, you know, you can see some people say that millennials started in 78 and some people say 82. I always referred to myself and was referred to as a Gen Xer, even though I was at the end. I was being referred to as a Gen Xer before the millennial generation was even a thing. So I guess I just have some attachment. My identity is sort of attached to that a little bit more.
All right. Well, anything else you want to share with us about real estate, about your involvement with the Rio Grande Foundation? Any political thing you want to bring out in the last couple minutes here?
Well, I'll thank you guys again for the opportunity to come and sit and chat with you. I guess the thing that I have the greatest level of expertise is real estate. So I would stick with that. One of the things people tell me is that they're not in a hurry we want to buy a house, but we're not in a big hurry. So if you don't want to work with us because of that, that's okay with us. I base my business in relationships, and I'm willing to work with people over a long period of time until they're really ready to go. But we're not in a hurry idea, even though you're not in a hurry, but once you find the right house, you need to get in a hurry right away. You need to get your act together and be ready to go right away. And there's also a cost of waiting. Property values are rising right now, and you can get priced out of a neighborhood that you really like if you wait a couple of months. That's a real thing. Because of the competition that's happening right now, the effect that's having is, house will go on the market for $250. 6 people will offer on it. It'll end up, going under contract for $260. And then if the appraiser comes in and cooperates and appraises at a contract value, over time, the effect that has is that property values continue to rise. And that's what we're seeing. So there is it doesn't always pay to wait. If you're thinking about buying a house, jump on what you can afford or slightly less than you can afford and expect to pay a little bit more than what's being asked because of the competitive nature of the market right now.
Well, thank you, Evan. Why don't you give out your contact information one last time, and we'll wrap it up then.
Sure. Again, my name is Evan Jones. I'm with KW Realty, and my phone number is 505-600-5510. Email is jonesnextdoor@kw.com.
And Evan, of course, is a board member of the Rio Grande Foundation, very involved in the free market and limited government. And this isn't to me a sales pitch. I mean, you're welcome to pitch your efforts here. It's about having a conversation of the theory of free markets and what's actually happening in New Mexico with somebody who practices in a field that really, there may not be another area of the economy that is as sensitive to economic changes and developments as real estate. I mean, we of course, you may not be, it may not be as fresh in your mind, but certainly the downturn of 2008 and everything that went wrong in housing back then is still something that we all, I think, have in our minds. And it's something that impacts our thinking and understanding of this industry. And when that aspect of the economy went downhill, it affected every other aspect. And I think we're still recovering, especially here locally.
I agree. And it could have been worse. This lending to people with the only requirement being having a pulse. It created this horrible situation with people, obviously what happened. I mean, people were getting these horrible adjustable rate mortgages, and once their rate went up, they defaulted. And those lending practices, fortunately lending practices have gotten better since then. But if lending gets loosey-goosey again, we could be in a bubble. Again. But I think people are more cautious now. They don't want to just buy a house just because they can. They want to make sure that they can afford it for the long run. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And also, some big free market policy ideas that we didn't even talk about because we're talking about the nitty gritty of the industry. But one of the things I was really pleased with the way Trump did things in this tax bill is that we reduced the tax advantage for homeownership. And I realize that may be anathema to you and your industry, but it's good public policy. There shouldn't be an inherent tax advantage for buying a home as opposed to renting a home or an apartment. It should be based on overall economic forces and the reality of what makes sense for you. And people are obviously still buying homes and this is a still healthy area of our national economy, our New Mexico economy and whatnot. And then the hobby horse that I always brought up was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And that's too complicated for us to get into in the last couple minutes here. But those secondary lending agents, which are, at least at the time, and it's changed a little bit, but quasi-government agencies that are also publicly traded, which is a really, really messy situation. Anyway, thank you, Evan. This and every week, we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. Thank you again for listening to Tipping Point, New Mexico.